right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Learn Why Nonprofits Need D&O Coverage. For those of you who are not familiar with D&O coverage, that would be your directors and officers coverage. I'm Michelle at CID Insurance. I'm your nonprofit underwriter and your commercial underwriter as well. Also on today's call from CID is Alexa, our marketing manager. And then we're lucky enough to have Kristen Hazard and Sue Trung from USLI helping us present today's presentation. So we're going to go through a few logistics. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sue and Kristen, and we'll be here for you guys throughout this webinar. So just a few things. If you haven't attended a webinar with CID before, you will be muted, but you can throw your questions if you have any of them into the chat, and we'll make sure to answer those throughout the presentation. If for some reason we're unable to get to them or it's something that needs a little bit deeper of an explanation, we'll definitely send you an emailed response or we can talk further about those items. And then we'll go over what our objectives are today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sue to begin. So for, understanding what a nonprofit is and how prevalent they are in our communities, they're anywhere and everywhere that you can probably think of, and you might not even realize that you've encountered a nonprofit. So we're going to give you guys some more knowledge on why management liability coverage is crucial. So the management liability coverage, you'll hear that term, is also the directors and officers in the employment practices liability. We'll get into more details about that. So if you hear that term management liability, that's what we're referring to. And then we're also going to learn about some advantages of being able to package nonprofits. So not just giving them the D&O, but also giving them GL when they need it and property coverage, potentially inland marine, special events. So all the things that you could package into one policy to make it advantageous for a nonprofit. And then we're going to go over a few easy ways in our office to be able to get quotes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sue to get us started.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to start beginning by talking about some of the common myths and misconceptions about nonprofits. So these are your everyday objections that we hear all the time. The industry segment is smaller than others. So risks like restaurants, contractors, hotels, and apartments are so much easier to find and more profitable to write. So that's actually not true because nonprofit sector typically will have about 2 million nationwide within the industry. And a really fun stat that someone told me that stuck with me is for every Starbucks that you see around the corner, know that there is a nonprofit around there too, and much more. So if you can imagine, there's just nonprofits everywhere, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Nonprofits have charitable immunity, so they don't really need insurance. What exactly is charitable immunity? So for every state, it's essentially saying that because they're a nonprofit, they are immune to getting sued, but that's not necessarily true. Even though they have that, every single state's laws are a little bit different. And what it doesn't cover is that they won't provide defense costs. And if the nonprofit has any employees, all of those are risks that aren't covered. So even though there is some type of charitable immunity, this is dated and limited in terms of the scope of what they can provide. And nobody can sue a nonprofit. So as someone that works for an insurance company, I can tell you that is definitely false. Nonprofits, even with the best intentions, will always come across and offend someone, or something might happen by accident and a lawsuit's on their hands that they have no means or experience to deal with it. That's why insurance is so important to have. And when they say nonprofits don't have money, so they can't pay for premiums. To run a nonprofit, even though their goal is not to benefit and have a profit, they still have donations coming in. They still have grants coming in. That's what they need in order to run the organization. So if an insurance premium would say it's, our lowest premium is like $475, that's more than affordable compared to your average claim, which costs about $150,000. So what are some examples of nonprofit organizations? As I mentioned earlier, there's over 2 million nonprofits nationwide. And so those are including ones without 501c status. So what that means is even though they don't have their official status, they're run like a nonprofit still, and we'll still write those. 70,000 new entities are filling in every single year. So the number of nonprofits are growing. And this is just a little bit stats of how it's broken out. So far, there's over 400K in social services, 500K in membership orgs, and 350K in houses of worship. So as you can see, this is a huge sector. There's enormous opportunity in here, and it's a great account to place. Like nonprofits are smaller, they're easier to place, and once they have that insurance, typically they will stay with the insurance. They'll just automatically renew. It's not one that's overly complicated. They don't typically change their missions. So once you land these accounts, typically they'll stay with you. So I just want to touch on like nonprofits in general. So when people hear the word nonprofits, like before I even got into insurance in this sector, when people mention nonprofits, I think food banks or homeless shelter, but there's so much more out there that people aren't aware of. So these are just fun picks that I wanted to highlight. So the one on the left top part is on the weekends. This is a golf course located near our home office in Philly. Country clubs, golf courses, all of those typically are nonprofit organizations. The one at the bottom is a veterans log near a beach. So people go to the beach all the time. They're crossing this building. They don't even pay a second thought to it. They think it's like some type of like business building or home. But what it is a veterans organization that has been there for like over 30 years. The bottom portion, educating children, this one is actually a private school. And so I know private school and nonprofits, you don't usually connect those two, but the education sector is huge. We will write private elementaries, Montessori's, middle school, and high schools. What we won't do is charter schools, but pretty much anything below the four-year college and charter schools, that's something that we'll write, and it's a nonprofit. And the last one that I want to bring up is the NCWA. That is one people typically don't even think about. It has over 1 billion in terms of assets, but they're categorized as a nonprofit. Fun fact is a couple years ago, the NFL was still considered a nonprofit and they got sued because it just didn't make sense for them and they had their status removed. But nonprofits pretty much are everywhere. These are pictures of your youth orgs, your broadcasting, pretty much in any categories that you can think of. Know that there's some type of supporting nonprofit organization that's out there for them. So it's just a matter of knowing where to look at. But I want to go over some of the different information with the directors and officers. So every single nonprofit has a board that's on there. So you have a board member that's helping run the organizations. And so insurance will pretty much, what are the duties of these board members that are sitting on there? They have the duty of care, which requires the directors and officers to act prudently and reasonably to the management of the organization. Duty of loyalty prevents an officer from using their position in the organization to further their personal interests. So what exactly does that mean? So say a board member that is sitting on a nonprofit, he's a real estate agent and he purchased a property for cheap 2 years ago. Now this nonprofit is looking to buy a new building to host their events. If he sells the property, his own personal property to the organization at a much higher rate without doing due diligence and like checking for other comps, that's a breach of duty of loyalty. Duty of obedience means that the directors and officers are running the organization according to their charters and bylaws. So they're following the rules of the organizations. And then regulatory duties are pretty much, are they following the laws applicable in their states? So when you join as a board members, these are the 4 duties that you're committed to as a board member. Yep. And so what does insurance do? It pretty much transfers the risk. Say a claim comes through or the directors and officers breach this duty. It could be completely by accident. If you think about nonprofits, most of the people that volunteer, they don't have a lot of experience with law. They're typically just applying and wanting to be aboard out of the goodness of their hearts. They're committed to the mission and the cause. So insurance helps prevent these. So if there's failure to adhere to the missions, misappropriation of funds, breach of duty of care, loyalty, or obedience, or failure to supervise, these are typically the claims that you would see on the directors and officers side. And then the other portion of it is the employment practice liability. So a lot of nonprofits, people think, oh, there's no need for employment practice liability. They're actually, it's the opposite. So most of the claims that come through for nonprofits are not on the directors and officers side, but on the EPL side. So what people don't think about is that when you have employees, or if you have volunteers, or even like events that you're setting up and you're hiring vendors. All of these are employment practice liability exposures. So our definition of employees include volunteers too, which is so important for nonprofits. So those are the wrongful termination, harassment, discrimination, retaliation, and wage and hour, which is a big part. So an average cost of defending a nonprofit close by litigation is about $150,000. Most nonprofits do not have that kind of funds in their account, but $475 for premium, they definitely can pay for. So that's a huge difference there.
And then I do just want to say about the employment practices liability covering volunteers. While a lot of this presentation will be driven on policy form and things that follow suit to USLI, we do have other markets as well. And so depending on the carrier, volunteers may or may not be included, but for USLI's purpose, for the employment practices, volunteers are included. And I would say that's probably the biggest question I get when I send out a quote for directors and officers, or for the management liability that has both options on there. Most people come back and say, oh, they don't have any employees, so they don't need EPL. So we, offer the explanation that it is included, volunteers are included. But again, it's at the discretion of the board and the risk on if they want the coverage or not. But, we are listing out the reasons why it's included and what the definition of an employee is. And including the volunteers is really helpful, especially for these smaller operations where they might not have any employees at all and it's all volunteer based.
Thanks for clarifying, Michelle. Okay, so at USLI, when you receive a quote for us, you'll see that it's broken out into three different sections. And these are the management liability coverages. So you'll see the directors and officers, which provides defense and liability coverage for both the organization and the board members. Employment practice liability is an additional optional coverage that's listed on the quote. And that's for what I listed earlier, the discrimination, harassment, and then fiduciary liability. So this one is, a lot of people get this confused sometimes with crime coverage. That's not what this is. It's for the larger nonprofit organizations that might have a lot of employees. Typically, they'll provide some type of 401k or pension plan. This is where it comes in. So this would be for claims alleging negligence over the handling of these benefit plans. So that would be the fiduciary liability portion of it. And I just want to highlight some of the key features that USLI has that, makes us stand out a little bit more. So defense cost is outside of the limit. Most of the claims that come through, defense cost is what really drives these claims to go up so high. So defense cost is outside for for all of our quotes, unless you decide you want to put it inside. Lifetime occurrence reporting provision is essentially a lifetime tail coverage. So say you were a board, you sat on a board. 10 years from now, the new board members want to save money and want to budget, so they just decide there's no need for insurance anymore. If a suit comes in naming the organization and all its past board members and you're listed, you would be covered by this lifetime occurrence reporting provision. The next one I want to highlight is the data and security enhancement. So this is a 500K sublimit. So this is for data breach, identity theft, workplace violence. I really like talking about this one because a lot of nonprofit nowadays, they use social media to market, right? Nowadays people are on, I don't know, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and just everything is word of mouth through the digital platform. So having this extra 50K sublimit is really useful. An additional side A coverage. So when a board gets sued, say they max out on their limit, as a board member, your personal assets and your spouse's assets are at stake here. So, it's so important to have this directors and officers insurance, because if you come in sitting as a board just wanting to do a good deed and your name as a suit, all of a sudden your own personal assets, your house, your spouse's, assets, they're all at stake. This additional side A is dedicated for that purpose. And then full prior acts are all provided. On the EPL side, you'll have the FLSA, which is a 100K sublimit that's available for defense costs and losses. This is only speaking towards USLI. A lot of other carriers will do the defense cost, but they won't do the loss. So that is one feature that I do want to highlight. Third-party discrimination and harassment are included in our form, and we have a broad definition of the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And just the definition of insured includes volunteer, as I mentioned earlier. So some of the target classes that we have, this is just a very small snippet. If you guys are ever interested in like a broader marketing piece listing more classes, we definitely have that. Just message Michelle and she'll certainly will get that over to her. But one thing that I love about nonprofit is that it's always changing. The need for nonprofit changes based on what happens in the current world. So like an example is during COVID time when a lot of business and schools were closing and everyone was staying remote, a lot of people thought that nonprofits wouldn't have the proper funding. It was the opposite. You saw a lot more virtual tutoring centers happening. You saw more social services helping out the elderly, delivering food, providing that medical service. So based on what happens in the current world, the need for nonprofits and the different organizations that pop up will change. You know, during election time, you'll see more political action committees. But these are the different groups that we had. I mentioned education earlier with the highlights. Religious organizations is a huge one for us. And then just your typical food bank, homeless shelter. Environmental group is one that I want to highlight. That is a big one, especially in certain states like the Bay Area. It's growing. A lot of people are a lot more aware. They're getting a lot more funding with those. This is like a higher tier class, but definitely one that I've seen an uptick in. On the next slide is just a few more of our classes. You have your youth organizations. This would be the camps, youth mentoring, sports group, membership org. The photo earlier showed the veterans org, country clubs, promotion of business. One that is another class that I feel like I've seen an uptick on. This is the Professional and Trade Association. Things are so expensive right now, and I feel like a lot of people are, instead of doing the four-year college route, they're going to trade schools. They're looking at professional associations, and it's like, what other route can they take? And so that one has been an uptick that we have seen. Mental health is also a class that I feel a lot more people are aware of, and the need for it is has gone up too. So these are the higher tier classes with the clinics and health care provider. So essentially, we'll write those small hobby groups up to these much higher tier classes.
And then just before you jump into these claim
Yeah.
examples, Sue, I just want to say, like for nonprofits, like we were saying in the beginning, they're everywhere. So, if you are a part of a church or, you know somebody who's on a board, they're probably either on another board or know somebody on a board. So it's really just a domino effect about you being able to find opportunity to be able to help these people get insurance for their organizations. You go to your church and they probably have, maybe they have a food bank or they are associated with a food bank. So then you just have these branches that you're branching out on to be able to find all of these opportunities. Even at a school, you have your PTA, that's a nonprofit organization. And then sometimes they'll make a subsect in that one for something specific that where they're, PTA is raising money overall for the whole school, but then they have one that where they set up a committee that's specifically to do like the event. So that, like I said, it just kind of tiers itself out. So the opportunity is limitless and you can easily find them to be able to, try to get your foot in the door with these people. You get your foot in the door with one and you likely be able to keep it rolling and get into the door with many other organizations.
Yep. And so I want to close off my portion before I turn it over to Kristen. Like, just hearing live examples is always like fun, just to kind of like see the different things that might happen. So one is, I'll go over it quickly, the CNN 50 worst nonprofits. So years back, CNN did a piece where they list out the 50 worst nonprofits out there. This was on TV under America's Greed TV, and of course, we checked that list, and USLI had wrote one of those accounts. It was the number 2 one actually, and pretty much what happened was that this was a cancer fund organization, a foundation that was, I might be dating myself here, but if you were at, eating dinner and someone was calling the home phone asking for donations, right? This is that organization calling telemarketing saying like, can you donate towards this cause? So we wrote this in the 90s. the internet wasn't the way it used to be. So like nothing that we saw had any red flags. We wrote this for years and just renewed year after year because they just said everything was the same revenue. Nothing showed up that was different. Until this TV show came on, of course. And then after that, we decided to not renew this account and they bought a 3-year ERP. But let me back up and show what happened. So although it was a true nonprofit, they had a for-profit arm. That was the telemarketing portion. And so the organization was pocketing 99 cents of every dollar that came in, and only 1 cent went to the nonprofit organization. So once that broke out, of course, you can see why a claim came in. So a claim came in from 48 state attorneys suing for $178 million. So criminal charges are something that we exclude on our policy form, but we will defend until final adjudication. So on this one, even though we didn't have to pay for the full amount, we end up paying $900K in defense costs. And this is an account that we wrote for years. There was no red flags. Had someone not really dug through the financials to see, because on their nonprofit financials, everything was clean. The only thing was that they were linked to a for-profit organization. And when you dug into the financials from there, that's where things didn't add up. So one nice thing about nonprofits is their 990s and financials are typically online and public, so you can dig through it. So, we have since then definitely revamped how we looked at some nonprofits. But this was a huge organization, and the claim itself, I mean, I think we lucked out with that. Just 900K could have been a lot worse. The second one that I want to bring was the Bridge Club. Complete opposite. It's a very small organization. They paid $20 to join to play bridge every single day. So this was a lot of just retired folks in Florida that came together and played. There was a tournament that was held one day, and one member got a little heated and started throwing out a little bit of profanity, and it wasn't a good vibe. So they pretty much asked if he could leave the tournament. He came back to the organization later on and was given a 2-week suspension and got so upset he started cursing at the board members, and they said, you know what, you're banned from the organization completely. What they didn't know was that this guy was a previous Manhattan litigator. So he dug through the bylaws. Now, remember I said that that was one of the duties of the board members, knowing the bylaws. He dug through the bylaws and realized that the organization couldn't kick him out. They had to have issued at least 2 warnings before he could officially be kicked out of the organization. So he sued. The judge granted in his favor, and he was reinstated back into the organization. But at that point, he was so upset at them, there was a total of 5 lawsuits that came in from him because he was just mad. And so he sued the organizations. He had his wife sue the organization. And at the very end, the last straw was that he said that his entire life stream was to write a bridge strategy book. And because he was kicked out of the organization, he wasn't able to finish his book. And so he was able to show proof of like the pages that he wrote for the strategy book. The the organization ended up paying him out like 700K in to just make all this go away and to ask him never to come to this organization again. But can you imagine someone that accept only $20 as a membership fee? There was no way they would have been able to handle this claim by themselves, and that's why the insurance came in. But 2 very different examples. CNN, one was a really big run, sophisticated organization that had a lot of backing. Another one was like a small little bridge club group. So claims come through no matter what type of organization it is, no matter how sophisticated the organization is, and sometimes it's so emotionally tied, that's where the payout is and the money is coming from. So at the end of the day, it's really important to have insurance for these nonprofits to protect them. I think that's my portion. Thank you for listening, and I will turn this over to Kristen now.
All right, thanks, Sue. Hey, everybody. So just going to round it out, just to talk a little bit about some coverage options and why an organization might want to package versus actually writing it on a standalone basis. There are a lot of advantages to packaging, but it'll work for some organizations. It might not be ideal for everyone. We do see a trend where it's increasing, where they want the directors and officers as a part of a larger, I guess, coverage offering. And a lot of times that's in response to contracts or even what they might need for a grant. If they're working on a school premises, you better believe they're going to list every coverage under the sun. And so we're going to try to help you accommodate that. I know Michelle's in your corner, and we try to give her as many options as possible. But there's a nice piece of efficiency when you can package because you're only working with one application, hopefully only one underwriter. One policy means only one renewal, so you have an automated renewal. And one thing I think that we can also all agree on is that the beautiful thing about nonprofits is they tend to just renew. So there's high renewal retention. This increases that ability. Another benefit to packaging is you're reducing gaps in coverage you might not even be aware of. So these are some nice safeties for you. And also it just could reduce overall pricing. So there's a lot of key coverages that nonprofits might need that might be determined based on the type of nonprofit we're talking about. So if we can move on to the next slide, just kind of show some of the major areas that we commonly get requested. The general liability, which can include some specialized coverages such as abuse or molestation, social service professional liability, event liability, and hired non-owned auto. We talked a lot about the D&O. Liquor liability can factor into a lot of nonprofits. You know, nonprofits will host events. How do you get people to donate? Well, you give them some alcohol, they're definitely more willing to give you some money. They have to balance and decide, do they need commercial liability or host liquor liability? And that can be confusing because let's say they have an event and the cost of the ticket includes 2 free drinks. Is that now a host exposure or is it a commercial exposure? I would say your most conservative interpretation of that is that you treat it as a commercial exposure and get that type of coverage. But both the options are available to you and will help you navigate through all of that with each unique scenario. And then of course, property will factor in, though some nonprofits are so small they don't have a building. A lot of times we're seeing requests for contents coverage or even like the inland marine or some crime coverage. Lastly, umbrella and excess will play in a lot of times, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, what you should be aware of. With the GL, I just want to highlight a couple of things. Abuse or molestation coverage should be readily available in the marketplace, though we do see different carriers take different positions on it. I would recommend that anytime you have an organization working with any sort of disadvantaged population, maybe potentially youth, maybe potentially the elderly, that this coverage should be in place. I just think if they're dealing with people who maybe don't have as strong a voice in the community, there's a potential that somebody could be taking advantage of that, and unfortunately. So I would say it's readily available, and we'll try to work that in almost any product offering that we have, as long as they have the right loss control measures in place. You might find you're getting an organization that's brand spanking new. They don't know what to do. There's a lot of advice that we can offer. Almost everything that USLI will be able to underwrite, we will tell you the steps that we want to see in place. Everything can be implemented, and we can usually give some time for them to be implemented. Additionally, once they get a policy in place, they will have access to things like discounted or free background checks, sample policies, and sample waivers. So again, another advantage to working with our policy form. There can be a lot of ways where we can help the nonprofit ensure they have a long-term mission, keeping kids safe, keeping the elderly safe as well. And then with E&O, E&O can come up with any sort of nonprofit that might be providing a professional service. It could be a church with their pastoral counseling. It could be a counseling center or somebody working with kids, offering services to those kids, or even therapies. So what really hinges on how you define what a professional service is. Here with nonprofits, it's not what they're doing for a fee necessarily. So it's important to take a look at that in the form and have a broad definition. But when and why you'd want to have the professional liability with the general liability is because sometimes it can be tough to determine where the loss arises out of. Did it come out of somebody tripping and falling on the carpet at the premises, or did it arise out of the service that's being provided? You'll always want those two coverages paired together so that there's no fighting as to determine which carrier is covering what.
And I do want to say, Kristen, real quick,
yeah,
on the E&O, I will say a lot of times I get people sending me in a request. when they're asking for E&O coverage for a nonprofit, but realistically, they're generally looking for D&O for a nonprofit. So, knowing the difference between the two, where like the professional service, where that would be where the E&O gets kicked in, and then the D&O covering the board running the organization. So a lot of times I'll get a thing, I have a nonprofit and they need E&O, which they could potentially need E&O, but again, that's going to be in conjunction with the GL. So generally, I have a feeling if you're asking me just for straight E&O, you're likely looking for D&O for the board. So you're looking for that directors and officers coverage. Not saying that, like we said, a nonprofit could definitely have that professional exposure and need that coverage, but when people come to me like, oh, I need E&O for a board, that's generally not the case. You're looking for the D&O coverage.
And coming back to, that's why you work with Michelle. She's going to help you navigate through all of that. And another area she can help is with special events. Like we were mentioning earlier, all nonprofits have special events. It's how they raise their money. Oftentimes, maybe that would be the first way they're reaching out to you because some event hall or venue is saying you can't come in here and start your event until a policy is in place. So when you're looking at the insurance that you have and the package that you have, it's a good question to understand how the carrier treats special events. Like, so what is that line? What is a special event versus normal operations? A lot of times it is that fundraising function or just something outside of what would be a church's normal operations or a shelter's normal operations. We look at it and our goal is to try to package it on with a blanket special event coverage. That way we're covering about 90% of what they're going to do, what most nonprofits do from a fundraising standpoint. There's a benefit because you don't need as much information. It is easier to carry into the renewal and less paperwork. Ultimately, this is a great way to go. It's also less expensive. So we're going to look at the number of events that they're having, the number of attendees that they have, and if they need liquor liability, we would look at the number of consumers potentially. So then lastly, the umbrella and excess, we're going to look at it whether it's supported or unsupported, just meaning we could write it over our own primary offering or it can be written over another separate liability carrier. So there, if it's over another carrier, we just want it to be B++ or better and make sure that we're comfortable with the form. But I would say this is a growing trend. Contracts for service grants, even the landlords are wanting to see $2, $3, $4, $5 million in limits in place so we can make that easy for you as well. And then, of course, you're probably wondering, well, hey, this all sounds so great. How do I get a quote? Well, there's a lot of ways you can get a quote. You can always send it to Michelle, but I like to just really quickly introduce this idea of instant phone quoting. You can see the phone number right there. With nonprofits, calling in and talking to a live underwriter can really help cut through a lot of stuff, right? You might not know what the rating basis is that you need. You might have something like a Bible study group and you're like, is that a church? Is it a membership group? Is it a charity? Don't worry about it. Just call that number. In a few minutes, we can likely get you a quote for all of the coverage lines we just talked about. So it makes it really, really easy. And then you don't have to go to the trouble of getting a whole bunch of applications filled out and trying to figure out which one is the right application. So we will navigate through that. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle just to kind of go over the finer points of what CID is offering here.
So yes, so the instant phone quote is definitely a great option for you guys, especially if you need a quick quote, and I, not going to be able to turn something around for you that quickly. And like Kristen said, you generally are able to get a quote. And if for some reason it's not something that they can quote over the phone, it doesn't necessarily mean that USLI can't quote it. It just needs a little bit more of an underwriting. So they'll send you an application, which is geared towards a nonprofit. So you don't have to worry about those accord forms that I know many of you agents don't enjoy filling out. So you would just complete that application, and it, it includes all coverages on there. So you'll have the GL, the property, the D&O, the EPL. So it's like if they only need GL, you can skip most of the application and just complete the GL portion of the application and the basic information that's needed to get a quote. If you do use our instant quote system, depending on the risk, we do offer increased commissions at 12.5% or 15%, just depends. And then we do include a flat broker fee of $50. And then they're available Monday through Friday. So for you guys to be able to call in and get that quote. And again, if you have questions about things on the quote, or you're like Kristen said, you're not sure how to classify it, you can just come to them like, I have this. Believe me, they'll likely do that. I email Kristen regularly when I get inquiries from people and I go, I have no idea how you classify that one. So I'm going to ask Kristen, and she's going to give me an answer, and she's going to help me understand it. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And then I can direct you guys from there. So just some basic information that you need for these instant quotes are their name, their address, what they're doing. And then depending on what they're doing and how it's classified, the underwriter will let you know if it's going to be rated on square footage, if it's going to be rated on the number of members, if it's rated on sales. So all that information is just basic information you'll need. And again, and it's really easy to get, like, if you need a revised quote, I have some agents who will just call back, you give your quote number and they'll pull it back up. And sometimes, people go through 3, 4, 5 quotes just to be able to get to what the board is looking for, and, maybe get that to that price point that they don't want this coverage, but they want that coverage. And so they just want to be able to see it. So it is a quick process. We've done many demos on it. So if you want further information on that, we do have a recent webinar on going through that process. And then, like we said, if for some reason USLI can't quote it, they'll send you an application, or if it's something that they can't do at all, and you're on the phone with them, they'll transfer you automatically over to me in the office so we can talk about it to see if I have another market available for you. So, don't be afraid if they tell you no. It doesn't mean that it's no across the board. It just is a no as USLI. We also have web quoting available. I would still suggest that the instant phone quote is better than web quoting, especially if you're not sure how to classify a risk. So we do have that option available if you want to quote it yourself. So we do take a look at all those instant quotes that come through. So we're reviewing them to make sure that they're classified correctly, just so you guys can see that. Alexa's going to show you guys on our website where you can find this information on being able to phone quote and web quote. So we'll just go over show you that real quick.
Okay, hi everyone. So we have this little thing right here. It says online quoting, and then you're gonna find two. You're gonna find phone quote with USLI. This has its own page. There's a little demo here. There's the phone number. There's a printable list of all the products. So you also have them listed out here of all the products that are phone quotable, and then the web quote. If you switch over to that tab, we have the drop down here of all of the different products, and if you click on whichever product you're trying to get a quote for, it'll send you to USLI's website. Let me just click one. It'll send you right here and send you to log in. And then for any other applications, we do have all of our applications listed here as well, and they're all categorized. So you can find any applications if USLI is not able to quote it over the phone. Okay, let me switch back to our presentation. And yeah, so if you have any questions at all, you can contact Michelle with any of those questions. She'd be happy to answer them. And then check out our website for any applications tools. We do have our recorded webinars on there as well. Anyone has any other questions, please chat them in really quickly before we sign off. But I'm not seeing anyone typing, so I think we are good. Thank you everyone for joining today, and we look forward to doing business with you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you,
you.
Sue.